Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on our channel. Today we will be talking about the 10 craziest dictators of all time. These dictators ruled with an iron fist, and their reigns were marked by terror, oppression, and brutality. From Adolf Hitler to Idi Amin, these men left a legacy of destruction and chaos that is still felt today. So, without further ado, let's dive into the list. Number 10. Robert Mugabe. Robert Mugabe was the president of Zimbabwe from 1987 to 2017, and his reign was characterized by authoritarianism, corruption, and violence. Mugabe's regime was notorious for its suppression of political opponents, censorship of the media, and human rights abuses. Under his leadership, Zimbabwe's economy suffered, and the country became one of the poorest in the world. Mugabe maintained his grip on power through the use of the secret police, propaganda, and the military. He is responsible for the deaths of thousands of people and the destruction of Zimbabwe's social and economic fabric. Mugabe's legacy is that of a leader who came to power with great promise and potential, only to become a ruthless dictator who inflicted suffering on his own people. Despite his fall from grace in his later years, Mugabe's actions continue to reverberate in Zimbabwe and the world today. Number 9. Francisco Franco. Francisco Franco was a Spanish general who ruled the country from 1936 to 1975. He came to power during the Spanish Civil War and established a fascist dictatorship that lasted for almost 4 decades. Franco's regime was characterized by authoritarianism, censorship, and the suppression of regional languages and cultures. He maintained his power through the use of secret police, military force, and propaganda. Franco's regime was marked by human rights violations, political oppression, and discrimination against minority groups. Although Franco oversaw some economic growth during his rule, he left a legacy of repression and division that continued to impact Spain long after his death. Franco remains a controversial figure in Spanish history, with some regarding him as a hero who saved the country from communism and others viewing him as a ruthless dictator who trampled on human rights and democracy. Number 8. Nicolae Ceausescu. Nicolae Ceausescu was the leader of Romania from 1965 until his overthrow and execution in 1989. His regime was marked by extreme repression, censorship, and a cult of personality. Ceausescu's rule was characterized by a personality cult, with him portraying himself as a savior of the Romanian people. He oversaw a number of human rights abuses, including the persecution of political opponents, ethnic and religious minorities, and journalists. Ceausescu's legacy is that of a leader who caused immense suffering for his people. His policies included the systematic impoverishment of Romania, with widespread food shortages and rationing being the norm. He also demolished many historic buildings in the center of Bucharest to create his grandiose palace of the parliament. His rule eventually led to a popular uprising in 1989, which led to his overthrow and execution. Today, Ceausescu is remembered as one of the most repressive and despotic leaders in European history. His legacy serves as a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the need for democratic governance and respect for human rights. Number 7. Muammar Gaddafi. Muammar Gaddafi was the leader of Libya from 1969 until his overthrow and death in 2011. His regime was characterized by his idiosyncratic personality, anti-Western sentiment, and brutal repression. Gaddafi's rule was marked by his support of terrorist groups, his sponsorship of international conflicts, and his violent suppression of political opposition within Libya. Gaddafi's legacy is that of a leader who caused immense suffering for his people. He imposed a repressive system of government that tightly controlled all aspects of daily life for Libyans, with severe punishments for those who opposed or questioned the regime. He also oversaw widespread corruption, human rights abuses, and the suppression of basic freedoms. Gaddafi's regime was ultimately brought down during the Arab Spring protests of 2011, which were met with violent crackdowns by the Libyan government. His death at the hands of rebels marked the end of a regime that had long been seen as one of the most oppressive in the world. Number 6. Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un is the current supreme leader of North Korea, having assumed power in 2011 following the death of his father, Kim Jong-il. His regime is characterized by extreme repression, censorship, and a cult of personality. Kim Jong-un's rule is marked by a rigid and oppressive system of government that tightly controls all aspects of daily life for North Koreans, with severe punishments for those who oppose or question the regime. Under Kim Jong-un's leadership, North Korea has continued to develop its nuclear weapons program, which has led to international condemnation and sanctions. The country is also known for its systematic human rights abuses, including forced labor, torture, and the persecution of political dissidents, religious minorities, and LGBT individuals. Kim Jong-un's legacy is still unfolding, but his regime is already considered one of the most repressive and brutal in modern history. His policies have led to widespread suffering and deprivation for the North Korean people, and his leadership has been widely criticized by the international community for its disregard for human rights and democratic values. Number 5. Idi Amin. Idi Amin was an Ugandan military officer who came to power in a coup in 1971, ruling the country with an iron fist until he was overthrown in 1979. His regime was marked by extreme violence, repression, and a cult of personality that placed him at the center of Ugandan life. Amin's rule was characterized by widespread human rights abuses, including the torture, imprisonment, and murder of political opponents, ethnic minorities, and anyone who dared to question his authority. He was also known for his erratic behavior, often making bizarre and grandiose pronouncements, such as declaring himself the King of Scotland. During his reign, Amin oversaw the expulsion of Ugandan Asians and the seizure of their property, causing significant economic damage to the country. He also invaded neighboring Tanzania in 1978, leading to a war that ultimately resulted in his ousting the following year. Despite his brutality and crimes against humanity, Amin remained a popular figure in some parts of Uganda and was even celebrated in some quarters for his nationalist rhetoric and efforts to restore pride in Ugandan identity. However, his legacy is that of a leader who brought immense suffering to his people and inflicted significant damage on his country. Number 4. Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was the leader of Iraq from 1979 until his overthrow and execution in 2006. During his reign, he established a repressive regime marked by brutal violence and widespread human rights abuses. His rule was characterized by his megalomaniacal personality, his ambition for regional dominance, and his use of chemical weapons against both Iranian and Kurdish populations. Under Saddam's rule, Iraq was a state of terror where political opposition and dissent were not tolerated. His regime was responsible for numerous atrocities, including the killing of tens of thousands of civilians, mass graves, and the suppression of basic freedoms. In 1990, he invaded Kuwait, leading to the First Gulf War, and further isolating Iraq from the international community. Despite his brutal tactics, Saddam maintained a strong grip on power until the US-led invasion of Iraq in 2003, which led to his downfall and eventual execution. His legacy is one of a ruthless dictator who brought untold suffering to his people and destabilized the region for decades. Number 3. Pol Pot. Pol Pot was a Cambodian politician and revolutionary who led the Khmer Rouge regime in Cambodia from 1975 to 1979. During his reign, he presided over one of the most brutal and devastating genocides in modern history, in which an estimated 1.7 million people, or nearly a quarter of Cambodia's population, were killed or died due to forced labor, disease, and starvation. Pol Pot's regime was characterized by his extreme Marxist-Leninist ideology, which sought to create an agrarian, classless society. To achieve this goal, he abolished currency, private property, and religion and forcibly relocated urban dwellers to rural areas to work in collective farms. The Khmer Rouge also targeted intellectuals, professionals, and ethnic minorities, whom they viewed as enemies of the revolution. Pol Pot was eventually ousted from power in 1979 by Vietnamese forces, and he spent the rest of his life in hiding until his death in 1998. His legacy is that of a ruthless dictator who caused immense suffering and death to the Cambodian people in the name of his radical ideology. Number 2. Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin was the leader of the Soviet Union from the mid-1920s until his death in 1953. During his reign, he was responsible for millions of deaths, both through his brutal purges of political opponents and the forced labor and starvation of millions of citizens. He was known for his ruthless tactics, paranoia, and complete disregard for human life. Stalin's regime was characterized by widespread human rights abuses, including the forced relocation of entire populations, executions of dissidents, and the establishment of a massive network of prison camps known as the Gulag. Under Stalin, the Soviet Union became a totalitarian state with no tolerance for dissent, free speech, or individual liberties. Despite the atrocities committed under his rule, Stalin remained a popular figure among many in the Soviet Union, who saw him as a symbol of Soviet power and prestige. His legacy is that of a tyrant who brought untold suffering to his people and shaped the course of world history. Number 1. Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was the leader of Nazi Germany from 1933 until his death in 1945. During his reign, he initiated World War II and oversaw the systematic genocide of millions of people, including 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. Hitler's regime was characterized by extreme nationalism, militarism, and a belief in Aryan superiority. Hitler's rise to power was facilitated by his oratorical skills and his use of propaganda to shape public opinion. Once in power, he established a totalitarian regime that suppressed political opposition, curtailed individual liberties, and waged war on a global scale. Hitler's aggression and expansionist policies led to the deaths of millions of people, both military and civilian, and the devastation of entire countries. Hitler's legacy is one of infamy, as he is widely regarded as one of the most evil and destructive figures in human history. His actions continue to shape the world to this day, serving as a reminder of the dangers of extremism and hate. These 10 dictators are some of the most notorious and brutal in history. Their reigns were marked by terror, oppression, and brutality. They used violence and repression to maintain their power and suppress opposition. Their legacies are still felt today, and the impact of their actions will be felt for generations to come. We must never forget the atrocities committed by these dictators and work towards a world where such atrocities can never happen again. Thank you for watching this video. We hope you found it enjoyable. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on future content. And if you have any thoughts or questions about what you just watched, please leave a comment below. We love hearing from our viewers and appreciate your feedback. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.